Welcome to the Shakti Collective, and I'm Nandita. And today we have Alex with us. Alex, would you like to quickly introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Alex Korchinski. I've been working on accessibility for the last 5 years or so. I'm currently the director of accessibility at Nike, and I just completed my first week.
That is awesome. Very exciting. Congratulations on the new role. So if you had to describe accessibility in just 3 words, what would they be?
I'll give you one. Access.
Access. Okay, just curious. Why does that come to mind?
Access comes to mind because accessibility fundamentally means you're making your product to be accessed by more people. You're opening up your product to more groups of people. You're opening your product to be more inclusive. And in a way, you're opening your product just to be accessed by people, by everyone, including people with disabilities. So access is fundamental to the word accessibility.
That makes sense. That makes sense. And, just thinking about accessibility, like you said, it's, fundamental from providing access. What makes you care about accessibility? Like, why do you care about accessibility?
Oh, man. Can I tell you my story?
Yes, jump right in.
Okay. So I don't have a background in accessibility. I was a product manager working on growth at a company called Script. Script is an ebook and audiobook company. It's like Netflix for books. And I was very happy in my world of A/B tests and revenue generation and all this other stuff. And left for a fishing trip with my dad and my brother. When I got back, there was an email from our co-founder saying that we'd been sued by the National Federation for the Blind.
Ooh.
And it looked like we were going to lose a lawsuit. And we needed someone on the product side to take us through the settlement and the actual implementation. And he said, I trust Alex to do it. So I didn't know anything about accessibility. Like, I'm going to be honest with you. I'm not proud of my initial reaction. My initial reaction was, this isn't fair. We're a tiny company. This isn't what I was hired to do. I don't know anything about accessibility. And, but like, I knew the company needed me, and I liked the challenge of learning something new. Within a week, I had to get on a phone call with 12 lawyers and me to speak to the effort it would take to make Script accessible. We settled, and then the gist of the lawsuit was that we had 3 years to develop a reading product for the blind, essentially. So something that was fully WCAG 2.1 AA compliant. And as that project went on, I was still doing both jobs, and I found that I cared more about accessibility than I did about growth. There were a lot of reasons for that. One was that, ironically, when I started the project, I said, this is unfair, like for me. And then I realized how unfair it was for everyone else, that we had this large library of books that just couldn't be accessed if you had a disability, like if you were not sighted or you had low vision or cognitive disability. I felt like that was really unfair. I thought the challenge was really interesting. It's like it's like a shift in how you think about developing products, making usable designs, creating good code, creating more robust test plans that really just made your product stronger and more usable by more people. I loved the behavioral aspect of it, where like it required not just a change in your product, but a change in your process. It required a change in how people thought about who they were making products for. And I realized that like this was something that I just lucked into, that I actually developed a lot of experience with. And rather than be a tech guy that develops products for other white dudes that are like me, that I wanted my work to have a broader impact. And I just found it was such a deep challenge and empathy to think about how someone else who might not have use of their sight or sound or touch would use a web product. It's just fascinating to me. And so it's something I dedicated my career to.
That's a wonderful. And so during this phase or even before, was there maybe one moment where this was like your aha moment with accessibility?
Yes, and hold on, because there's a garbage truck. Okay, cool. So there were a couple. What do you mean? What do you mean by aha moment? Because I can answer that a couple ways.
However you interpret it, it could be like the first time that it made you think about accessibility, or it could be however you would interpret that. That, oh wait, this is really interesting. I didn't see this happening before.
There were. I'll give you two moments. The first one was when we were just getting started. So I mentioned that lawsuit came across my desk. What I did was I sat in a room with lead engineers on iOS, on Android, and on the web platform. And we turned on a screen reader and we used the tab key and the enter key. And I started writing down notes as they were telling me the different things that were wrong with the product. And I realized, one, how big it was. Like, that this is not just meeting a certain set of criteria. It's like, it was so big. It was the biggest product I've ever, like, it was so much to wrap my head around. And that was the first aha moment, was that it's going to require a fundamental shift in how we're thinking about building technology products. That it's not just like slapping on an automated test and then,
Right.
updating some color contrast and going from there. That was one aha moment. Okay, cool. The second one was near the end of the completion of the product, and or of the project. We did user testing for the first time, and we did user testing with people with disabilities. So I think it was three people who were non-sighted and 2 people who used a screen magnifier. And I was terrified because we'd been working on it for like 2 or 3 years. And although like we use screen readers and technologies, it was the first time I had worked with someone who had a disability who was using our product. So I remember designing this test plan for them to user test, and we had to pick a book. And so I picked The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho, which was a book I read when I was a kid, and I loved it. And I had them go to a specific page and then find a quote and highlight the quote. And I remember watching this woman who I think she lost her eyesight around the age of 20, and she was maybe in her 40s or 50s. And to see her use a screen reader, find the book, open the book, and start to read the book, which like years went into this. Like, this was not a couple weeks worth of work. It was like years went into this. Wow. And then find that quote and highlight it. And then she said, like, I love this. I would love to sign up for this service. I've been lucky to have a really cool career. That was one of the top 3 highlights of my entire career. So those are my 2 aha moments.
As a UX researcher, I feel like as you were telling the story, I felt like I was there with you, and I was jumping in joy when she could finally use it.
It was so
cool. That's amazing. And so during your career, you've talked about these different amazing moments. Is there someone that comes to mind who has had an influence on your accessibility professional career? What lessons did this person teach you?
Oh my God, so many. I mean, we were talking about this before the call, but it's such a welcoming community. People are so happy to share their knowledge. I could mention 20 different people. I'm going to at least mention one, and his name is Yuji. And when I started working on this at Scribd, I have a really good understanding of like the program level, the product level, how to wrap your head around scope, how to get teams to work together. But like, I didn't know the first thing about giving recommendations for engineering. Like, I could tell them that a header should be a header, that you shouldn't mark things up as a div or a span, that you should use a color contrast that meets contrast. I could not give them specific feedback on ARIA. So I told the VP of engineering, like, we need to hire a subject matter expert. Like, we need to hire someone who knows this. And so I interviewed a bunch of people, and I gave them a test. I gave them like the script header And I told them to tell me every problem that was wrong with it, every accessibility problem that was wrong with it. And some of them did okay. And then Yuji came in the room. And Yuji is one of the nicest people I've met, one of the most collaborative, one of the most empathetic, and just like brilliant with accessibility. So to watch him walk through the problem with me, that was a moment. And I knew we had to hire him, and we did. And Yuji was, his depth of knowledge was so vast, like so, we were like the perfect yin and yang complement, because I could see the problem from a whole level and could like win trust with leadership, with the CEO, with the VP of engineering. And Yuji won the trust of the engineers and the designers. And like he changed the program for the better. And one of the coolest parts about it was that he would say that I was the most influential person. Like he would say that he kept saying we couldn't have done this without you. Like, and like, I had to be like, Yuji, like, can you not see that you are the program? Like, this is you, this is your work that you're doing. So people loved working with him. He's still at Scribd. I was super proud of the work that he did. And it was the first time I'd ever worked with someone in the accessibility space, and it could not be more positive. Like his depth of knowledge, his empathy, his collaboration, his willingness to work with design and then go work with engineering and work with QA right after, and then work with PMs. It was amazing. So Yuji's the guy.
Yes, Yuji sounds amazing. And it sounds like there was, I mean, just you describing that, I feel I learned even a lot from that description itself. And in terms of, I guess, what keeps you inspired? You know, you've talked about these really amazing moments, which really, I feel like I'm standing right there with you, experiencing them. But what really keeps you going in accessibility?
I think how far there is to go. I think you know, there are companies like Google and Apple that are like really on the forefront of accessibility, and then there's a few other ones that are kind of up there as well. So let's say, I mean, LinkedIn, Microsoft. Trying to think. I mean, I'd include some companies I work with in that category. So Workday, Scribd, and then there's kind of everyone else. And to know, it's like, it's such a cliche, but like how far we've come and how far there still is to go. That's one reason I joined Nike, is that Nike has such a deep passion for inclusivity. Like it's so central to their company. And it's reflected in the technology they build and the products they have. Like they have a shoe called Fly Ease that they developed specifically for people with motor disabilities. And then to also know that that same company still has a long way to go on the digital accessibility side, and that is something that I can help with. It's like perfect, like this perfect marriage of a need that I have expertise in that I can help keep driving forward.
Yeah, that's a match made in heaven right there.
Right.
And so can you tell us a little bit more about your work? I know you mentioned that you've, just recently started, but what's the plan? What's the plan? How are you going to really create that impact through your role? As much as you can share.
It's my 5th day at Nike. So I can tell you what I think the plan is. I'll tell you how I've approached my first week and how I'm thinking of approaching the first month. And then we can talk about the first year and hypotheticals. How about that?
Absolutely. Go for it.
the first week, I've been meeting as many people as possible. Nike has tens of thousands of employees. The accessibility team, at least on the digital side, is new. It's 4 people, including me, and 2 senior engineers. And it's the digital side, I want to say, is at least 3,000 people. So it's pretty easy to do the math that says like 4 people cannot be responsible for the work of 3,000. So what I've been trying to do is meet as many people as possible. I've been asking them a lot of questions, but I've always been asking them 2. What's working with accessibility? What's not working? And then what would you do if you were me? And from that, like I'm trying to think about how this organization thinks about accessibility. Like How do they develop user personas? Do they give feedback on accessible designs? Is there a certain set of code standards we're trying to hit? When they do test plans, how do they go about doing that? How do they think about priorities? Of all the thousands of things they could work on, where does accessibility fit in that? Why do they want to do it? Like, why do they care about it? What's the legal risk? What's the upside for revenue? There's all these questions. Like, I'm trying to form a picture in my head of how this organization works currently. So that's one side of it. The other side of it is I have a team of people. I'm trying to figure out, like, what are those people's superpowers? Like, what are they really good at? And how do I get them doing that work, as opposed to me trying to force some directive on them? You can start anywhere with accessibility. Like, it touches so many things that I want to make sure they're paddling in the right direction. Where do we go as a program in a year? I will say that there's kind of two ways to think about how you get stuff done for digital accessibility. There's how do you make sure new features that go out the door are developed accessibly from the start? And then how do you think about all these other things over here that might not be on someone else's roadmap, but present blockers for someone with a disability? How does that work get done? How does that work get prioritized? And then at some point, like, how do you actually know that you've succeeded? Like, what are you going to do? User testing? Are you going to check off every WCAG criteria? Are you going to look at your bug backlog? So that's roughly where I see this going. Again, it's my first week, so there's a lot to learn.
That sounds exciting. Good luck on that journey.
Thank you.
And so, as your, I guess this could be from your previous experiences too, but I'm curious to learn more about, how do you build support for accessibility in your organization? What are some ways in which, you can share from your personal experiences or some things you've seen, but how can one advocate for accessibility, on their team?
I think you got to make the program bigger than you. That's where you start. I can't be everywhere at once. Like, especially with COVID and remote, my window is my laptop. Like, it is whoever I'm in a conversation with. And it's such a narrow way to view the organization that you have to win advocates. And I think it's every conversation I'm in. I recognize that someone who's a potential to be a champion for accessibility. It's understanding their motivations, like why it is they do the work that they do. What's their scope of work? Why do they care about accessibility? Like, is someone telling them you need to do this? Do they are they thinking about they need to make their product more robust? At night, like, thankfully with Nike, like the support is so massive for accessibility. Like, it's so central to its company DNA. Like, Nike has this mission statement that's like, if you have a body, you're an athlete. And that's how they think about their customers and their consumers and the people that use their product. That if you have a body, you should be allowed to you should be a Nike athlete. Like, you are a Nike athlete. And so it's so central to their mission. It's something that everyone cares about. And then, like, strategically, how do you win advocates? You start at the top, like at the top, not like some VP, like at like the leadership level. They need to care about accessibility. And then you also start at the bottom. So you start like with it doesn't sound glamorous, but like, what are all the bugs that we currently have for accessibility in the product? And if that only goes up a level, then the PM is going to say, the product manager or the engineering manager is going to be like, we have too much else to work on. We'd love to do this, but later. If you only start at the top, it's got to go down 15 layers before that hits the bottom of the organization. And so, like, it's this approach where you're building trust from the top down and from the bottom up at the same time. And then you start to net out somewhere in the middle. So that's how I'm thinking about winning advocates. You do training, you do education. I literally pulled out my phone just like an hour ago and like turned voiceover on my phone and ran the product managers and the engineering manager through their product. And they just said, like, don't, like, this is going to be painful. Like, they actually like went like this. And so just to like really give them an education piece. So that's how I think about winning advocates.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. And, as you've grown in your career, I know we've chatted before when you were working at Workday and now you are starting at Nike. What experiences have been most beneficial for you, for gaining experience within accessibility?
There are so many. I think a moment, there's a couple people. I think it's one thing to talk about accessibility in the abstract. It's another to have my coworker who is blind say, I can't read my tax form. Like, those are two very different things to follow WCAG and then to see the actual impact on someone. So I think a lot about those moments. The moment with the woman who was reading The Alchemist on script. That was a really positive moment. And then there's another moment where someone who's non-sighted comes across a product, and instead of saying what the button is, it just says button, like button, button. What if one of those buttons cancels your benefits? Like, no way of knowing. So those were the moments that were inspiring to me. I think really kind of getting to know the accessibility community better, and to get to know some of my coworkers that had disabilities and try to, I can only empathize. Like, I'm never going to have a full understanding. Like, I can blindfold myself and go through an app. That's not the same experience. Like, that's not equivalent at all. Like, I can take the blindfold off. And I think really trying to understand the issues they have, how things look when they work well, how things look when they don't work well. That's been instrumental to my understanding of accessibility.
That's wonderful. And so if you had to share your proudest moment in your career or in accessibility, does something come to mind?
Getting the job at Nike. Like, that was a realization of everything I've been working towards. I mean, I already shared with you the story of the user test. Like, that to me was, that on a personal level, that's the top. But when I got this role, it's a director of accessibility role at a really important company. And like, I'll tell you, I don't have director experience. Like, I don't even have management experience. Like, I'm punching so far above my weight that, like, it's such an exciting opportunity. But to know that the way I got there was based on my depth of experience that I've had before, and the vision of where I could see this program going, and how I could help, and how I could, like, help build a team, how I could help scale that team. It was a full realization of everything I've been working towards. And already the first week's been amazing. And I thought I was going to have like this, like a few weeks, like orientation, right? When you're in school, you have orientation, you're given the syllabus, you sit in a couple lectures, I give the basics. Like, no, that's not at all how it's been. It's been like, day 3, Alex, like, what do you think we should do? And,
nice. Jump right in.
It's really right in. And so to know that I have experience in something that's important to Nike and that I can help means a lot. So I'm just super excited for the road to come.
That's amazing. And so I'm just curious about the team. So is the whole team an accessibility team? Have you worked with other teams that were not dedicated accessibility teams? What's different, about working in a dedicated accessibility team versus, hey, I might be the only person doing accessibility on this overall, UX team or some other kind of team?
Yeah, so I've done both. So let me think. So accessibility as its nature is super horizontal, which means it moves throughout the entire organization. Moves through designers, the product managers, the engineers, QA, all the way up to the leadership level. And you kind of need this centralized unit that's going to help enable all these teams develop products accessibly. And you can't be everywhere at once. So it's this balance of like teaching people how to fish and then like I'm going to extend the metaphor way beyond what's necessary, but like teaching people how to fish and then going like offshore in like super rocky waters and like having like a steel iron rod and like catching a marlin. So you're doing two things. Like you're teaching people on the shores, like how do they reel stuff in? And then you're figuring out the hardest problems that no one else is equipped to fix and solving them. So I've done both. I think when a team is just starting to think about accessibility, there's a lot of fear. It's interesting. There's two things. There's fear, and there's like this hope. Like there's this hope that we can do the right thing. Almost no one is resistant up front. The fear comes from this lack of knowledge, and it comes from like almost like wanting to bury your head in the sand and not know how bad the problem is. Because once you turn over voiceover for the first time and you hear this product that you thought you knew so well fail, is a really hard moment for teams. And so just to guide them through that process, to understand that it's normal, we haven't been thinking about this, that's okay, I'm going to help you get there. That's what I've noticed works well with teams. So in summation, accessibility is usually organized as a central team that works across the organization. You also are sometimes embedded in particular teams just to help them with their new features. And so it goes both wide and then it goes deep.
So it sounds like it might be different for different organizations, like depending on where and how it's structured, because it seems to be structured differently in different companies.
Interesting. Yeah, could be. I don't know. I know how a few teams structure their accessibility team. I do know that if your team is just the accessibility police, or you're just telling people like, no, you can't do that, it doesn't work very well.
Don't be the accessibility police. Okay.
No.
And start talking about, I guess barriers. We've all faced a set of barriers in this field. Was there ever a time, where you feel like, oh my gosh, this is the most frustrating thing I've ever faced, within your career in accessibility?
Yes, there was. There were a few times. So right when we were starting out at Script, I'm like level-headed and calm to a fault sometimes. Like I can be so stoic and like not that I've seen it all, but like I don't get rattled very easily. And once we'd done training, once we started working, there was no momentum. And there was no like, product managers are like, this is all great, but I have to do this thing. Like this thing over here, I can't do your accessibility thing. I want to, but I have to work on this thing. And I felt that happen over like 1 month, 2 months, 6 months, 9 months. And then before I look at it, like we have a list of like 492 issues. And in 9 months, we fixed like 20 of them. And we have like 2 years left. And so I actually had to strategically kind of get frustrated in front of people. Like I not that I was actually frustrated, I was like a little bit frustrated, but I had to express like, we're behind, guys. Like we're not where we want to be. And like, here are the consequences of us not meeting this. And the consequences in Script's case were like, we had been sued. Like most other teams get like some goodwill behind it. And like, it comes from a place wanting to do the right thing. We had been straight up sued by the National Federation for the Blind. And I was in those calls and it was intense. And I did not want to go back to those people and say like, you tried to do the right thing, but we came up short.
Gosh.
Yeah. And so I had to like strategically get frustrated with some people, and like both people below me, like engineers or, not below me, but like people below my level company. And then people above me, like the VP of engineering or like the CEO, like, so those were moments where I think the lack of progress felt frustrating. And like once I trained, I thought that was the easy part. I thought that was the hard part. Like people understood accessibility, putting that knowledge into motion, that was
right.
hard. It was a lot harder than I thought it was going to be.
That makes sense. And so what do you wish every leader, so like now that you're the director of accessibility for Nike, as you speak to other leaders or even other people, even if they're leading a team, what do you wish every leader knew about accessibility? There was one thing.
Oh my God.
It's like everything. You got to know everything.
Okay, it's a journey. It's not a destination. You're not going to have some magic check mark that says that you're done. That it requires a restructuring to how you think about making products, like kind of from the ground up. And it's going to take a lot longer than you think. So this journey, not a destination, it's like this concept of having like a bug-free software product. Like it never ends. There's always going to be bugs. There's always going to be accessibility problems. It doesn't matter. So to know that like the reward is your change in process, is your change in empathy, is your change in how you're expanding your user base, the number of potential customers that you can bring in. That's the reward. Getting a check mark to say that you are done with accessibility is not a thing. Like, that's what I wish leaders knew.
Yes, that is so true. And that's a really beautiful way of putting it. You know, technology is always gonna change. We're gonna have to change with it, make it accessible. So absolutely. And time journey back to Nike. I know you've just started, but I'm just curious because you said you were just 4 or 5 people, and then you've got these thousands of other people that you have to influence and affect change. How do you scale accessibility across a large enterprise? And what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm speaking at an all hands on Thursday, so that'll be one way, which is like kind of terrifying, but also I think about where I started with accessibility, and like I had a week to learn about accessibility before I got on a phone call with like 12 lawyers in me. The way I look at it is like, 1, you're giving me an extra week, and 2, I'm not getting sued by any of you. So it's going to be, if anything, there's both like a large platform that you can go on, especially now where I can't just go walk around the office and talk to people. I think getting in front of those really large audiences and explaining what accessibility is and why it's important is one way. There's every time you have a meeting with someone is a chance to win them over to an advocate. So I'm in meetings from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. every day now, like every half-hour chunk. To know that if you can win over that person and get them to care about accessibility, even if they don't fully understand it, that they can go back to their team, or they can go to their manager, or they can go to their direct reports and tell them to start thinking about accessibility. Like, what you want is you want people to raise their hand and say, great, this product's cool. Have you considered accessibility? To have that moment happen across the org, that's where you need to start.
And then how do you do that? So, on the flip side, how do you change people's minds and hearts about accessibility?
The nice thing is you don't usually have to change their heart. A lot of people's hearts are in the right place. And I've had so little pushback among people saying that making products accessible for people with disabilities is the wrong thing to do. Nobody said that ever in my entire career. Like, no, we shouldn't do this. So the heart is the easy part, I think. I think people don't want to build something they care about to disclude a group of users. Like, nobody wants that. Changing their minds is the harder part, and that's to get them to understand that accessibility is not a burden. It's a benefit. It's not something that's going to be a list of bugs in a report that you need to run. It's going to be a benefit in the way that you make designs more usable for everyone. You make products more robust for lots of different user types. Said another way, nobody likes small light gray text. Like, no one. There's not a single person who's like looking at a web page and thinks like, can you make that like smaller and like a little bit harder to read? And it's this ethos and this mindset that allows you to really make a much more intelligently designed product that's more usable by lots of people, including people who don't have disabilities. I think that's where the mindset starts to change, is once you realize how much stronger you can become looking at things through the lens of accessibility, people start to buy into it and people start to prioritize it.
I love that. And so, to you, what does the future of accessibility look like 10 years, 20 years down the road, if we're having this conversation?
Oh my God, that's such a good question. I think one thing I think about is that maybe 10 years ago, people thought about responsive design. So how do you make designs that respond on a smaller phone? And that was like a new crazy thing. It's like, oh my God, we have this smaller real estate. How do we take these gigantic web pages and put them onto a small scale? That's not something people talk about anymore, because that's just like design. Your design needs to be scalable. So I hope accessibility is something like that, where it's just like a part of doing work. It's just like a habit that people get into. It's these sets of standards are just how you make good products. You shouldn't have to tell someone that their placeholder text within an input field should actually be a label, because that's an example. Like if I get into a field and I start typing and that little gray text that used to say username disappears, if I have a cognitive disability and I have short-term memory loss, or frankly, if I'm distracted, how do I remember what that thing is, what that field is for, if there's not a label that's permanently above it? That's an example of an accessibility requirement that helps everyone. And so I hope like we don't have dark patterns like that across the internet, that those companies who are not accessible are thought of like how we think of websites built in like 1995, where you look at this and you're just like, what is this? How could anyone use this? I hope accessibility just becomes like a normal, accepted way of how we should build products and how we should do work.
And to get there, so what advice would you give to others who are thinking about, becoming involved within digital accessibility?
There's a ton of opportunity. There are a lot of companies that need help. You can enact change on any level. Okay, I'll give you an example. At Nike, the reason this program exists is because an intern did her end-of-year project on something completely different and included a slide about accessibility that had like 4 bullet points and a couple of examples. And this is like in the appendix. And she was presenting to a senior leader about what she'd worked on that summer. And in that, and like she got up there and she went in this person who has 20 years experience and told him about how the product was falling short in accessibility. And he said, yes. Like, to his credit, he said, yes, you are right. Like, this is something that we need to go further. She is the reason we have a program. Like, I met with her on Wednesday. And
I love it.
To think that like you are too small to make a difference is so wrong. That change can happen on any level. It can happen from a CEO. It can happen from an intern. And to like raise your hand and say, what are we doing about accessibility? Like, how are we thinking about this? That's enough to start with.
I love that. And so with you thinking about that one thing, right? What if someone's watching this, right? What is that one thing that someone can go do today, right away, so they can start achieving accessibility in the short term? It could be something as simple as, when we think about posting pictures on social media, trying to add the alt text so that, screen reader users can access that information. So is there like a one thing that you would like to tell people that, hey, you can go do this today?
Try to use an assistive technology. Try a day where you only use the keyboard and see what you can do. See where you get blocked. Try to use products in a way that you are not used to. Don't use your mouse for a day. Turn on a screen reader. Like every Mac computer has VoiceOver in it. NVDA is free. Like, turn it on and see how it works. And it's like I hesitate to use this word, but for me it's fascinating. Like, it's so interesting to see this. I've used a computer every single day since I was 9, maybe. And to know that there are ways that people access technology that's different from me, and to get like even like a tiny little bit of empathy and to understand how that looks, you're never going to have the full understanding. But to like start to deepen your empathy into how people who are not like you would use a product, that is a
Right.
great place to start.
That is awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing that.